Neil Jordan is one of the most critically acclaimed and prolific of Irish film directors. He's strongly associated with what might be termed the second wave of Irish filmmaking, which are Irish films made after the 1993 re-establishment of the Irish Film Board, though, like his contemporary Jim Sheridan, he continues to make films to this day, most recently being Greta from 2018. The first wave of Irish filmmaking, from the 1970s and 80s, was distinguished by a lower budget, more experimental, and aggressively political aesthetic and ethos. However, films of the second wave, which include the work of Neil Jordan and are characterised by larger budgets and oftentimes a direct appeal to the sensibilities of a tourist gaze, that is, they cater more on the surface to an American romantic ideal of Ireland, nevertheless oftentimes carry with them an ideologically radical, that is, challenging to the status quo, subtext. Neil Jordan's work is particularly exemplary of this. In this lecture, I'm going to address how several of Jordan's key films, The Crying Game from 1992, The Butcher Boy from 1997, Breakfast on Pluto 2005, and Undine 2009, creatively reimagine Irish history towards a politically radical purpose. Like the documentaries we've seen that have refocused Irish history on the subject of women, Jordan's films are usually concerned with destabilising the primacy of heterosexual white men over the telling of history, that is, over its narrativization and historicisation. His films problematise male supremacy in different ways. In so doing, they also implicitly challenge the authority of the Catholic Church, with which the politics of Ireland have become invariably wrapped up for the last millennium or more, and which can be seen as having had a repressive influence on women and LGBTQ individuals throughout that history. The Crying Game was released prior to the re-establishment of the Irish Film Board, and its critical success was partially responsible for the Irish government's reinstitution of the board, formally recognising that film production was a key cultural commodity and valuable to the nation. The Crying Game furthermore established Neil Jordan as an internationally acclaimed film director. Not only is it a great film, but it is an example of a cleverly marketed film. Because there is a somewhat shocking revelation about one of the main characters partway into the film, promotional material at the time directly requested that cinema patrons not spoil the surprise to their friends. This of course increased curiosity and word of mouth regarding the film and helped propel it to popular and critical attention. I'm going to try not to spoil this surprise either, in case any of you opt to watch it, but it's going to be hard not to hint at what it is. We've already seen the opening sequence from The Crying Game in the last lecture, which establishes three of the main characters. Fergus, the protagonist played by Northern Irish actor Stephen Ray, who is a frequent collaborator with Neil Jordan. He's the guy who will pull a gun on Jodie in the first scene. Jodie is played by Forrest Whitaker, an African-American actor, whose character here is a British soldier of Caribbean descent. It's important that Jodie's character is black, as it adds another level to the issue of complicated identity in the film. And as we'll see, the issue of nature and what is natural is an important and complex one here. Jude is the femme fatale character in the film, who first appears as an innocent-looking blonde, but who later appears in a more harsh-cut red bob and dark lipstick, marking her out even more as a threateningly sexual woman, which she is shortly revealed to be in the scene here. What with Jude sexually entrapping Jodie into the custody of the IRA at the beginning of the film, it would seem at first that the film is playing into an age-old stereotype of the Madonna-whore dichotomy, whereby virginal women are safe and sexually active women are threatening to men. However, this is totally subverted by the later appearance of the character Dill, played by Jay Davidson. She's Jodie's lover, whom Fergus tracks down out of guilt after Jodie dies in captivity at the hands of the IRA, and with whom Fergus shortly enters into an affair. Again, I don't want to spoil too much about the film, but I'll say two things. Firstly, it's important that three of the four main characters have pretty gender-neutral names: Jodie, Jude, and Dill. Secondly, it's important that Fergus's sexuality appears, by the end of the film, to be anything but strictly straight. Throughout the film, for one thing, we get hints that his love for Dill might be a mere displacement of a homosexual attraction to Jodie. He is fascinated, for instance, by the fact that she keeps his old cricket uniform hanging in her apartment. And when Fergus is frightened for Dill's life later on in the film, he convinces her to disguise herself in this very uniform, and they proceed to have sex. This is a film very much about the instability and shifting nature of identity and attraction. And in that the characters are all representative of highly overdetermined and symbolic roles, Fergus as the IRA man, Jodie as the British soldier, Jude as the femme fatale, and Dill as the damsel in distress, their sexual fluidity comes to hint at the instability of those political and social roles as well. And while there isn't a direct address to religion as an apparatus of the Irish state here, there is an implicit challenge to, or at least questioning of, what Catholic doctrine might say about the so-called natural order of things. This is why the famous scorpion and frog scene from The Crying Game is so interesting, and I'm just going to let it play here without comment. But I'd like you to think about it, and hopefully watch the rest of the film if you can to gain further context.
They're giving you trouble, Fergus. It happens. There's two kinds of people. Those who give and those who take. Take off the hood, man. It's okay. I understand. Don't mind if I prattle on, do you? I think about your songs that you don't. Two types, Fergus. The scorpion and the frog. Ever heard of them? A scorpion wants to cross the river, but he can't swim. Goes to a frog who can and asks for a ride. Frog says, I'll give you a ride on my back. You'll go and sting me. Scorpion replies, it would not be in my interest to sting you, since as I'll be on your back, we both would drown. Frog thinks about his logic for a while and accepts the deal. Takes the scorpion on his back, braves the waters, halfway over feels a burning spear in his side and realizes the scorpion has stung him after all. And as they both sink beneath the waves, a frog cries out, "Why did you sting me, Mr. Scorpion? For now we both will drown." Scorpion replies, "I can't help it. It's in my nature."
So what's that supposed to mean?
Means what it says. A scorpion does what is in its nature. Take off the hood, man.
Why?
Because you can't. And it's in your nature. See? I was right about you.
Don't be so sure.
Jody's always right.
The Butcher Boy, Neil Jordan's film from 1997, is an adaptation of a Patrick McCabe novel about a boy living in a border town, that is, near the division line between Northern Ireland and the Republic, who descends into madness throughout the course of the movie, eventually coming to commit a severely heinous crime. The issue of the border here is symbolic, and indeed reminiscent of the ubiquity of blurred lines throughout The Crying Game. The main character, Francie, is caught between numerous competing influences, not just politically and geographically, but also in terms of a moment in time. The film is set in the 1960s, in a time when Ireland was rapidly adapting to globalisation and the influence of pop culture, which is seen periodically through visualizations of Francie's daydreams about aliens and comic books. Francie is further torn up by the shortcomings of his alcoholic father to take care of him after his mother's death, and the failure of the Catholic Church to protect him from abuse. Ultimately, Francie must be seen as a victim of circumstances, political, religious, and ideological, so victimized to the point that his whole conception of reality becomes skewed. In effect, Neil Jordan explodes many myths about the nature of Ireland, and in one scene literally blows up that image. Breakfast on Pluto sees Neil Jordan returning to a theme of sexual fluidity and gender identity, elements of which have already been seen in The Crying Game and The Butcher Boy. It is another adaptation of a novel by Patrick McCabe. The film sees the main character of Kitten, played by Cillian Murphy, navigating Northern Ireland and London during the Troubles as a transgender woman, having to defend herself and her identity versus both the political and ideological repressive forces of patriarchal British and Irish Catholic culture. Like Francie Brady of The Butcher Boy, Kitten has no effective role models in the void of identity the Catholic Irish Church has created in seeking to limit gender and sexual expression to a biologically determined sex and sexuality. Also like Francie, she develops fantasization as a coping mechanism and as a radical revisioning of what life could be like for individuals who cannot adhere to the strictures of patriarchal culture, which is anyone who is not a white heterosexual male.
Once upon a time,
Does it always have to be once upon a time?
there was a fisherman. He was pulling in his nets.
Is he a mermaid?
No,
Finally, Undine might seem to be the least radical of the four films described here. It is, at face value, a retelling of the Selkie myth, which originated in Scottish and Irish folklore about women who take the form of seals in water and humans on land. But it is made more complex in refocusing attention on the subject of Syracuse the fisherman's daughter, a handicapped girl who becomes a sort of stand-in for us as the audience. We don't quite know whether to believe in the fairy tale that we're being told or not, and in this, we are asked to further question elements of national and ethnic identity. We will talk more about Undine in a later week, when we'll watch the film in its entirety, so I don't want to say too much more right now. Altogether, these four films provide us with examples of a radical revisioning of Irish history, culture, and mythology. Neil Jordan asks us here to re-evaluate mythical figures, stereotypes, and even what might formerly have been seen as concrete notions of Irish identity in subverting representations of traditional Irish institutions like the church, the military, the family, and fairy tales. In so doing, he asks us to always be mindful of the political ramifications of personal stories, to remember that issues pertaining to identity, such as gender and sexuality, can be powerful symbols of political and ideological protest, and that vice versa, political unrest reflects often harmfully on personal freedoms and on our mental stability.